Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Butcher Shop, where we interview OG and young gun angler tires who craft and fish the deadliest streamers in the game. On the inaugural interview is my buddy Blane Chocklett. We take a deep dive into the T-bone and discuss everything from materials that didn't make the cut, to hook and shank configurations, to how to fish the T-bone. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. To make sure you don't miss a single episode of The Butcher Shop, be sure to subscribe in the podcatcher of your choice. We're only distributing episodes on the Articulate Fly for a limited time. And if you like the podcast, please tell a friend and please subscribe and leave us a rating review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And finally, a shout out to our sponsor, Trout Routes. We all know streams and rivers are getting crowded, and chances are you're not the only one at your local access point. Get away from the crowds and busy gravel lots by using Trout Routes Pro with over 350,000 access points mapped across 50,000 trout streams and much more. Trout Routes has all the data you need to help you find angling opportunities that others will overlook. Up your game and download the app today. Use code ARTFLY20, ARTFLY20, all one word, for 20% off of your Trout Routes Pro membership at maps.troutroutes.com. Now, on to our interview. Well, Blane, welcome to the Butcher Shop.
Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, dude, I'm excited. I'm honored that you are going to be the first guest on the brand new podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear all the stories that are going to be coming from this. It's a great idea, a great concept, and I think all the listeners are going to love the history of streamer evolution. And, there's been a lot of legends that I've been very fortunate to know and been mentored by. And, I look forward to seeing what all you do with this. I know we've been talking about it for quite a while. I'm glad to see it coming to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, folks, just the general format for the interviews, and we've got some other types of content coming too, is I'm going to take one pattern per tire, because we just can't cover everything that like Blaine's done in one interview, or Russ or Tommy or Kelly. And we're just going to pull that pattern apart. So hopefully you like it. Blane, if we kind of jump back in the time machine, go way, way, way back in time to the pre-T-bone time, right?
Yep.
What was the fishing problem you were trying to solve when you started designing the T-bone?
Well, I thought it'd be a great idea to start being a fly fishing musky guide. And that all goes way back to when I was like 9 or 10 years old, early teens or whatnot, and fishing with my uncle on the river and hooking up with a muskie on a jerkbait, and didn't know they were in there, didn't know what a muskie was at that time. And then moving forward a little bit with Dahlberg and his show with Walker's, not Flip, but Dahlberg's The Hunt for Big Fish. He was catching muskies on a fly, and I was like, well, I've got that in my backyard, and it re-sparked that interest of trying to make that happen and guiding for smallmouth bass. Later on, moving into the 90s, I'd see muskies in their normal spots during different parts of the year, and started fishing with a buddy of mine that was the only person I knew growing up that fly fished. And he ended up, as we graduated high school and all, he met a guy that he started fishing with conventionally with muskie, and us being good buddies and learning the fly stuff by Harrison Steves and Steve Heiner early on. We were like 15, 16 years old. He was the only person, like I said, that back then, way before internet and all that stuff, that was the only person I knew that fly fished. So we became friends, and he was a good tire in his own right, and understood fishing and all aspects, not just fly. And he was a good all-around angler, still is. His name's David Garst, good buddy, even though we don't see each other much. But seeing these muskies in these different areas and wanting to kind of learn more about them and all, I just wasn't getting a lot of interest in throwing different things. And you're talking about early 90s, mid 90s time frame. And that same time era, I started going to shows with Harry Steves, who was my mentor, and we started Loco Foam together. I was introduced to Bob Popovic, who's going to be mentioned probably a lot during your interviews and all. But Bobby, we just lost here back in November, was always just a huge sounding board for me, good friend and mentor. And his reverse style of tying was kind of my aha moment with a lot of things, with starting to get muskies to start looking at what I'm throwing, because I'd fish with my buddy Dave. And after my guided trips, I'd meet him and we'd go out to spots where I knew fish were hanging because I'd seen them many times. And, he'd give me the first shot at fishing, and I'd throw different deceiver style flies and whatnot, and occasionally maybe get a follow, usually nothing. And then after that hour, I'd say, well, you throw gear at him, and he'd get a bite within the first couple casts after, and I was like, well, I'm just not throwing stuff that's getting their attention or creating those triggers that make these fish want to eat. Right. So, that was a real learning curve for me because I didn't have anything else to go by. And then we kind of go into the Bob Popovic's beast fly reverse tying thing back when he started playing with that. And that really changed everything. So I don't know if you want me to keep going on that or if there's any
absolutely questions. Keep going.
Okay. So anyway, Bob's, beast flies started getting some attention. So I just kind of started putting my own twists on it. And, muskies don't give you a lot of positive reinforcement, but you got to take any little bit you get from them. They are known as the fish of 10,000 casts, one of the top 5 fish in the world to try to get on any tackle, So I'd start just kind of with sweat equity and blood, sweat, and tears, just being stubborn and not giving up, just started picking away at it and figuring out, what are these triggers and all this stuff. And, I met a friend that's a fisheries biologist and studies fish vision and understands their biologic makeup. His name's Andre Horodisky. And he, I would just bounce ideas off of him. And he's a fly designer with Uncle Feather Merchants. And, even though his main feature and main target is saltwater species, he has a broad view of different fish and how they view things. And I was just talking to him about triggers and fish, and he starts talking to me about biologic makeup and what makes them work. And we're talking about the gear and the different lures that my buddy was getting fish on, and he would explain that to me and, look at how they're designed and what they do. And I just started working from there and started designing stuff. And every little bit I got, it was a positive, right? So I started, getting follows or occasionally get a fish to come in on a figure 8 or whatnot, and just started picking away at it. And, the beast fly was a big deal because I had the profile silhouette and had the presence in the water to make them become a little bit more interested. And I went so far back in the day that my buddy was using these bucktails, and we call them bucktails because they're tied with bucktail, but they have a big spinner blade in front of them. So I even took it to that extreme where I basically bent wire, made a long shank, tied a bucktail at the back end with a hook, and put a clevis on there in beads where it would spin around. And then I took a paper clip and bent it, folded it over to make a U shape, and then bent it to make a spoon shape, and then took tape, which is more like Christmas ornament or Christmas ribbon. And I took 3M 77 spray and sprayed it to where it made the shape of that bent spoon. And I took a spoon and then traced the outline of that and cut it out into a spoon and epoxied it. So then I had a light enough lure fly to be able to throw, and it worked, but it was terrible to cast. So it wasn't fly fishing at that point, but I did get interested in fish and caught fish on it. But it was just like, this is not what fly fishing is all about. might as well be throwing a bait caster. So going back to Bob's deal, one of the big things was, he just had that profile silhouette that was getting interest, but it wasn't 100% triggering him, because his whole concept was to create that illusion of mass and profile and silhouette, but still making it castable and all. And even though it was there, it just didn't have that final trigger that I was needing, which muskies, they're designed with big teeth, long mouths, long body shapes. So fish like that, I've learned over years and trial and error and fishing and guiding, that fish that are shaped like that, and this includes the big brown trout, once they get in that 20 plus inch range, their mouths get bigger, they get bigger teeth, and they're designed to grasp and hold on to their prey items. So one of the big things that Andre was telling me, that what you need to start designing is there are flies that will turn sideways in the water and show profile and silhouette, much like a jackknife or truck jackknifing, or something sliding in the water to show profile silhouette. Because obviously I can't get that thump that you get from the blade of a spinnerbait, and that's the main trigger there. That was speed. So you can't really get that with a fly. So I had to create ways of showing profile, having enough mass, having enough, I guess the term would be, I'm not going to say push water, because Larry would shoot me because he hates that. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. But flies don't push water, because I'm not going to get into that. I'll let Larry talk about that. But anyway, it's just having enough presence in the water to make these fish realize that it's there and it's worth taking a look at, right? So then I just went into what is now the T-bone aspect, where Bob's fly was so light and airy, but it didn't have some of those triggers that I needed. So I just basically took his platform and added to it, right? So I put in these spreader dams, because over time, a lot of casting, a lot of fishing, the flies would start collapsing because the resiliency of the bucktail would just start losing its shape, and would get snaked out and just wouldn't hold that profile and silhouette. So I met a guy at these shows years ago who's a famous striper guy out of Northeast. His name's Rich Murphy, who's an engineer. And he showed me this tubing at a show. He said, I played with this stuff, but I don't know, you're innovative. Maybe you can figure out something to do with it. So I brought that home, started playing around with it. And again, this would have been in the 90s, mid 90s, late 90s. And that's where the body tubing came from Rich Murphy, and started messing around with it with small flies at first. And that's where those fly palas came from. And, my answer to a Rapala fly, where I could put a lip on it and get that same action. But also I went away from that because it wasn't a great casting fly. And although it does work well, it's just not fly fishing. So I just started playing around with that. I was thinking about, man, how can I create this big body that's going to hold up and also divert water? And that's when I started figuring out how by diverting water flow through the fly, you can slow things down and create a pause and a stop, and the fly will turn left or right, up and down. And it started showing profile. So I just kept playing with that idea. There's a lot of ways you can achieve that, but that was an easier way and a more consistent way to get a profile silhouette and have the same consistency throughout many flies tied, right? So I started putting these body dams in with the body tubing, which is basically, for those that may not know about it, it's basically kind of a Chinese finger puzzle that's made out of nylon. So when you stretch it or push it together, it'll expand 2 to 3 times its normal size. So I would melt the end, tie it in, cut it to a certain length, like 2 inches, melt that in, and then fold it over itself, and then tie it back down, and then push it back where it created this cone or trumpet. It looked like a trumpet four, but when you folded it back, it became like a perfect cone, basically, or a wider. I don't know what term you would want to use, but it just made this more of a. I don't know if I would say a bell shape, but it's similar to that. So I started putting fibers in front of it, and it could be synthetic or bucktail, and that it would hold its shape over time. But also, what I figured out over a while, one of the main features of it was diverting water from the inner part of the fly and pushing water around it, sliding it outside of the fly, which would allow it to swim. Because what happens when you allow material to flow through uninterrupted or without being deterred in a different direction, it would just swim straight, right? So by figuring out if I made a material in the middle of the fly that would divert water around it, it changed everything, which led into the game changer platform that I probably more noted for. And just playing with that in different sizes, diameters, and all that kind of stuff, I could create trout size predator stuff to big musky stuff to big striper stuff to you name it. So that was kind of the big, I guess, genesis of the T-bone concept, and still is today. And I've got things in the hopper moving forward to make that process a lot better and faster and all that. And that's what fly design's all about, is taking a problem and trying to solve it. And that's the Bob Popovic way. And I'm a firm believer in that.
Yeah, very, very neat. So as you were kind of getting dialed in on that original T-bone, and you'd kind of gotten the reverse tile and the bucktail, and you'd figured out how to make these little mesh dams, were there any materials that you played with that just didn't make the final cut in the pattern?
Any material that would hold water became a big negative early on, because the flies became so big, kind of up to 15, 16 inches, 17 inches. It just wasn't fun casting it, right? So the big thing was finding materials that would shed water, but would hold shape and make casting better and hold up to, hundreds of hours on the water, that wouldn't break down. So, and that's kind of the combination of synthetics and natural materials. Bucktail is, we always, in feathers, are nature's armor. And, that it's a very resilient material, but you'll have limitations on size and all that kind of stuff and availability, right? So that's the big problem with natural fibers. Then you have the feathers that we put in at the back that have that nice swooshing motion at the end and all that. And they're all great. And I love natural fibers, but you have limitations there. And it's not really marketable to the masses because it's hard to get consistency on that stuff. But that's where synthetics kind of come in and kind of, I guess, make up for what natural fibers lack.
Yeah. And so I would imagine, I mean, is it true? Because, I mean, I know now, when you talk about the changer platform, you talk about kind of like support and veil. Was that tubing, reverse tie, was that kind of the beginning of that concept that's kind of walked through from the T-bone to today?
100%. It was. Once I learned that I could prop up materials and create the profile that I wanted, you could manipulate that stuff and especially the size dam and the angles of it. You could make it taller and bigger and wider to create a bigger body. And all that stuff affected how the fly swam in the water and how it reacted to what you did with your stripping line. And all that in itself was always a learning thing. It was a whole process because I didn't have anybody to teach me any of this stuff. So it was just, I guess my God-given talent that, and being stubborn and too dumb to quit. It was something that I was super passionate about and wanted to learn. And, selfishly, I was wanting to back myself in that corner because we had great musky fishing and I knew I could catch them on gear at any point, and I knew that if I kept on it, I would figure out a way to be able to get these on fly because there was nobody fishing them at that time. And it was, to be honest, it was virgin water, and it just, I mean, the world was my oyster at that point, and it was a great time growing up, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I not giving up is really, and that's the big thing about fly design. It's not, I never go to the desk trying to figure out a new pattern. It's always problem solving, like Bob had always said. A great fly always comes from solving a problem that you see on the water. And just like I said, it wasn't overnight. It was a process, and sticking with it and developing this stuff and figuring out what works and what doesn't. There's, I have a wealth of knowledge of that just because I've failed many times, right? So it's all about just keep at it, and just don't try to dream something up. I mean, you need to really look at what the whole. Don't look through keyholes. That's another Dahlberg thing. Is like walk through the door and have an open mind and try different things, whether it's live bait or gear, and then adapt that to what you want to do with a fly. And that's kind of where my whole life's been revolved around.
Yeah, really neat. And I want to take a deep dive into the kind of the head of the T-bone, because I think that's kind of where the action is. And I know a lot of people are interested in this, and this goes into what you touched on earlier about flow around versus flow through. Can you talk,
Yep.
can you talk a little bit about kind of how, head size and shape and density kind of affect the swim, and kind of how you can tweak that to, get more of a jackknife or more of a swim?
Sure. So as you go down in size, I usually go smaller in the head size too, because when you drop down in size, a little bit goes a lot farther, right? So you put a giant head on a small fly, it just gets weird and it doesn't look right, and the profile's not right and all that stuff. But so if I wanted more of so a lot of this had to do with water flow and water conditions, like how much water, like high water, whatever. So generally, you also have to look at sink rates and all that kind of stuff. So smaller head, smaller dams within the fly would allow it to sink a little bit faster, so you could get down in the zone a little bit quicker. But smaller head, you were not going to get as much of a jackknife. You still got side to side movement, but you didn't get as big of a pause in that front, right? So the bigger head design and the more dense it is, the more you're going to slow down as you strip it through the water because of the drag that's created with everything behind it and that bigger head. And that bigger head will make the fly slide off to the left or slide off to the right a little bit more and pause. So I started learning about that and tweaking, different sizes for different water situations and whatnot, and how deep I needed to get the fly and all that kind of stuff, because all that plays into factors on how you fish in a given day or water conditions. So that was a big part of it. And, with the T-bone heads, with the reverse tie, with the body tubing, I played with that for a long time. And then, brushes started becoming available, and I started playing with that and figuring out what type of brushes and getting a brush machine and whatever, and figuring out what brushes work for this and that. And, the density of it is super important, and the head shape and all that kind of stuff. I'd like more of a big bulbous head to get more of that, like, slide left and right, because it's going to, just the thickness of it and the density of it all makes sense, right? So I learned all that by being on the water and tying at the vise and figuring out how I needed certain things to work during certain situations or different fish. We call it 50+ inch stripers on these T-bones and muskies and all kinds of stuff all over the country and world. So, I mean, it's proven to be a really good platform, but it all started with Bob and his design with the beast fly.
Yeah, really neat. And so I guess too, right, if you don't do bulb and you have more of like a knife shape, you get more of a swim, right? And less of a jackknife?
Yes. Yep. You can get a little bit more to that swim bait motion, as long as you have a denser inner body. And that's kind of like the evolution of that. The T-bone and then the Game Changer platform came from that. And then shortly after that came the bucktail changers. And to make the bucktail changer work properly, you have to basically tie your whole fly in a bulkhead type of situation where you're leaving when you reverse tie it, instead of trimming the inner, you leave all that. So that is the density that you need to create that swim to divert water around the main part of the body of the fly. And that's the genesis of that. And that's where that whole concept came from and this is all, if you could see the picture here, it's all like building on things you learn through fishing and tying and positive and negative reinforcement that you get on the water.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know just like folks are obsessed with the head design, there are lots of different kind of shank and hook variations. Do you have a handful of, one hook, two hook, where you want to place the longer shank, kind of two or three flavors of that you can kind of share with folks and kind of tell them why they work the way they do?
Yeah. So like a T-bone, and that's one reason I came out with that longer front shank. And that's also why the jerk changer works so well. So if you have a static front end, meaning that front end does not move, and then you have materials behind it. So you could have a front end that's rigid, meaning if you have a shank that's 4 inches long or 5 inches long or 6 inches long, you're going to get more of a glide because you're not going to have anything that moves throughout that. And if you divert water around the body of that fly, meaning body dams or reverse tile, bucktail stuff or synthetic stuff where you have an inner material that's diverting water around it, you're going to get more of a glide / turn left and right. Right. So what I always like to do with the T-bone styles, I want to have a longer front end, and then I'll generally try to put a hook in the middle. Right. It's usually right behind that. And then I might have a shank or two shanks behind that, or even longer feathers and whatnot behind that bigger hook that I put in the middle of the fly. So if you took a 10-inch fly, to just have a round number, right? So I may have a 5-inch shank in front, have your big hook, and then tie long feathers off the back, deceiver style or in the round with bucktail or synthetic material or whatever to create that. And then I'll have that head shape, that bigger bulbed head or whatever, because at that point I want more of a left to right jerk bait style motion. So that's how I do it. And you could tie it, I guess, more slender on the sides, but then you want to add weight in the back, and that's where the hook and stuff comes from, and all that. But you're not. We can go down that rabbit hole. But what I've learned by truly getting a glide bait is you have to have materials up front that do not recoil or act like a spring. Okay, so you have to have rigid fibers all the way through the fly, so you don't get that rebounding effect, which slows down motion. So everything has to be rigid and doesn't pulse. So bucktail pulses, I don't care what it is, so all you're really getting at that point is a side to side motion. And that's kind of what the T-bone does. But if you're wanting to get like a glide where it might glide out to the left 2 foot or down 2 foot or up 2 foot or right 2 foot, you have to tie everything back, and it has to be super dense, and you have to get rid of pulse. You can't have compression where fibers are moving up and down in breathing. You want more of a solid body to where it's not going to slow down the glide in the water.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's kind of like the materials open up like an umbrella in the wrong direction, right? Yeah. And in terms of like, two hook styles, kind of anything there in terms of like weighting and kind of how to kind of get that tuned so that you get the action that you want?
Yeah, so I generally don't weight flies. I usually will try to place materials in the right way to make them, because I feel like, and it's kind of the Gary Loomis thought process, weight is a deterrent of performance. So I try not to weight them. I mean, sometimes weight, you need it to just get down in the zone better. But I try to I usually will do that with the different lines that I'm fishing and all that. And some people like to kill their flies. And if I have to, I just bring weight with me and adjust on the water. But I like to keep my flies unweighted unless I'm specifically doing a certain thing, like need a jigging action and having bottom contact or whatever. That's a totally different thing that we could get down the road on that at some point. But, you can get into, shank hook, shank hook kind of concept and get it to fit the profile and length and setup that you want in a certain type of fish, right? So it's all about looking at that biologic makeup of the fish that you're targeting. Are they graspers or are they inhalers? What are those main triggers in that fish? And that's kind of how I look at it and how I design the flies that I'm targeting these fish with.
Got it. And so I'd imagine, right, if they're an inhaler, one hook usually works, but if not, you might want to have that stinger, right?
Yep. And it also, if it's a huge fly, sometimes I'll put two in there just so I have that insurance policy. But, if you're fishing average flies from like 4 to 7 inches and you're fishing big bucket mouth fish like targeting stripers in that 20 to 40 pound, 50-pound range, 6, 7, 8-inch fly is going to go down like it's a piece of popcorn, so then you don't need two hooks. But if you're fishing grasping type fish, like it could be a barracuda or it could be a king mackerel or it could be a wahoo or musky or pike or whatever, or big brown trout, then I'm going to strategically put hooks in the middle of the fly because they usually are looking for that middle target. So when you show profile and silhouette, they're going to kind of hit it or T-bone it in the middle. And that's where the name from the T-bone came from, is it shows profile and they usually drop through it, hitting it from the side, T-boning it. And that's where I start putting hooks in the middle or back middle or whatever. And it's paid off over the years. Back, golly, I don't know how long it's been now, 15, 16, 18 years ago, I was tied this 17-inch fly and it had one hook in it. It was in the middle. And we, at the time, it was one of the bigger ones we got. It was like a 54-inch musky, and it had him pinned pretty good. So it's all about fly placement and figuring out fish species and, building that platform the way that fish needs to eat it.
No, got it. And so, you get the original T-bone with the bucktail dialed in. Tell us a little bit about kind of branching out and moving into the synthetic T-bone.
Yeah, that's easy, right? So, I love natural materials. My feather changer is still my favorite fly, one of my favorites that I've designed. And I always like adding natural fibers and stuff into it. But in reality, you have limitations, not only in size and whatever you can get, but limitations on, consistency and availability of those materials. So, a lot of natural materials also have some type of water absorption too. So you end up kind of losing a little bit in the end there overall. So for me, one, not having as much time to tie and being on the water all the time. And back in the day, it's gotten, 250 plus days a year, and being a husband and father and all that stuff, you don't have that much time, and you also don't have that many hours in a day, and you have to sleep at some point. So synthetics became very important to me, and being good friends with Dahlberg and his mega divers and all his materials that he's designed with Hedron. It was an easy way for me to kind of slide into that realm. And, a lot of these other fibers came out back in the 90s. And then, Popovic using a lot of synthetics, and Steve Farrar and all his stuff, who's a great fly designer in his own right. Getting familiar with those guys and using some of these fibers that they were using on saltwater flies, it was an easy transition for me to say, this stuff will work just as well. And it's a whole lot easier to be able to replicate every time. And it's definitely going to be easier and cheaper for the average fly tyer to be able to get these materials and be able to tie consistently as well. So one, they hold up well. Two, most of them don't absorb water. So three, it makes it easier casting, and it's going to be more durable with toothy fish. So, using all these different materials that are available with Flashaboos and Larry's nylon materials all these different styles of nylon materials that he had. Just it was an easy transition, and it made a lot of sense because at the end of the day, we're always trying to make something a little bit better and easier. And that's where that really came from. And it was just a no-brainer to just add that to the, I guess, body of work.
Yeah, it gave you all those colors too. And I know one thing you and I have talked about, and I've heard you talk about it, when you're teaching is, uh, you know, how you strategically place smooth versus textured fibers in the fly to affect the swim. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you take like kinky fiber or whatever material, like kink nylon, it could be wig hair or whatever. Um, any type of material that's curly, it's like curly hair versus straight hair, or flat material versus um, material that like riding a roller coaster. It's up and down and wavy. Wavy material slows down water flow, right? So if you have something that glides more, you're going to want to have more flatter fibers, much like mylar or flashaboo. That stuff glides. Anything that's slick and flatter is a much better option to have something that you want to glide in the water or turn easier or swim easier in the water. The combination of that and the deterrent of water flow through the middle of the fly, you have the best of both worlds. And that's kind of where the jerk changer came from, and learning from all this stuff way back when, it just made sense. Because if you take a hen saddle, for example, versus a rooster. So rooster saddle looks similar, but it's different, right? So it's more airy. It's not as compact. Doesn't have the web in there, which that's what makes hen saddle work so well for the feather changers and any type of fly, or say Bob Popovic semper fly, schlappen, for example. It's a much denser feather, and it's if you look at the way the fibers are too, when it's tied in and wrapped, it holds its material together more densely, but it also water flows over that so smoothly because the fibers are so slick and flatter. So I started learning that, coming up with the feather changer, and not understanding why that works so much better than some of the other kinkier materials I was using with synthetics, and having to work a little bit harder to get the swimming action I wanted. So slicker, flatter fibers are much better to get an easier swim as long as it's dense enough, and diverts water around the middle of the fly.
Got it. And so, we've got kind of the original T-bone and the synthetics. And I know one of the advantages of the synthetics is you can time and make them monstrously large because you don't have to go find bucktail that's 14 inches long. But
True.
but I also know, right, that, each of those flies is a platform. They have kind of different weight and hang characteristics. And I was kind of curious, if you could talk a little bit about like, when you like to fish an original T-bone versus when you might, want that lighter, synthetic T-bone, putting the size factor to the side.
Yeah. So, I mean, windy conditions versus normal conditions. I mean, bucktails are great. And when you have the materials to use to make them the way you want to make them, they're good. You do run into some buoyancy issues with bucktail, as the inner workings of bucktail, they're hollow. So you do have some type of neutral buoyant, I guess, consistency to bucktail with that, because they are hollow, right? Even, throughout it, they have a little bit of neutral buoyant to buoyant quality about them. Synthetic, especially nylon type of fibers, they're generally going to sink faster, and they can get you in the zone quicker. So a lot of times when I'm using or needing to get in a deeper situation or heavier currents or whatever, a synthetic is a much better option for that, because you will be able to get down a little bit faster because it's going to sink a little bit quicker if you use the right stuff. And that would be like ultra hairs and big fly fiber, and a lot of these synthetic materials that have that more of a nylon base. So you could use polypropylene style stuff that's going to add more buoyancy, and that would be a negative to that actually. But that's a synthetic version that would mimic doing a reverse tie with bucktail, because then you're using a fiber that's hydrophobic really, and will kind of stay in that type of zone and get that same hover that you would normally get from like deer body or bucktail or whatnot.
Got it. And so, in terms of tying the T-bone, are there, you've taught the pattern a lot, are there like two or three kind of common mistakes you see folks make at the vise when they're trying to tie the pattern?
Yeah. I mean, some of the bigger problems that I see is how much material they put on each. Like you can build up too much bulk. So a little bit goes a long way, especially when you're building a 12 plus inch platform. You can, using, the body dams in the middle, just putting less material to veil around the whole thing and moving to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, a little bit and less in the back and a little bit more as you get to the front is a much better way of doing it. And how they attach the materials to it as well. Like what I do with the T-bone is, I'll do that body dam and then I'll move the thread forward and create a thread dam and leaving a little bit of a hollow or a gap, which creates, I guess, I don't know, what would you call it? Like a little bit of a,
you got like a notch, right?
yeah, it is a notch, but I'm creating a thread dam in between the thread dam. And then you have a lower like divot area where I can then spin the deer hair around it so it doesn't want to creep forward. So it all butts up against the body dam, right? So it's going to get its true profile and not get slipped forward where it just starts slipping and you're losing that spreader dam effect at that point, right? So that's a huge deal with that for me, and just putting too much material on in one spot. And it's always better to have a lot less material in the back and start building, especially in the shoulder area and then the head. That's kind of where the most important part of it is, where you want to create a little bit more material. And a lot of that's just time on the vise and learning from mistakes and just, repetition.
Yeah. And so just to maybe help people, if you take like, I don't know, let's just say like a 6 or 8 inch T-bone, and we'll just talk about pencils of deer hair, like from the back to
Sure.
the front, like, how many pencils would you have in the back and how many would you put in the shoulder and the head?
Yeah. So in the back, you would go pencil. And then, if you broke it up into quarters, like the back quarter would be pencil. You get to the middle quarter, you probably look at, I wouldn't say like a Sharpie size. You'd probably go in between that. And then you start getting into that front shoulder head area. I'd be looking at Sharpie size portions of material to be able to, spin around those body dams. I think that'd be a really good analogy to kind of let people kind of focus on. So, pencil dam size in the back, in between Sharpie and pencil in the middle, and then definitely Sharpie size in the front section.
Yeah. And in terms of maybe like a trick for like the angle you want on the dams, because I mean, you can kind of make them any kind of angle you want to, right? And you can make them high or low. And I know you want to kind of build more profile as you move to the front, kind of a rough road map there.
Yeah, sure. So obviously you're going to want less profile in the back. So I usually would start maybe with a reverse tie or two in the back, because I know that's going to collapse over time, and water flow over it. It's going to compress more. And then as I go forward, I'm going to add a little bit more angle and height to it, and then as I get forward, you could go anywhere from 45 to 90, or 60, and kind of graduate up as you go forward. And, that's kind of the general rule there. So I might even where I put longer bucktails and longer feathers in the back. I may just tie that first part, just standard tying in bucktail. And then the next part, I'll do a reverse tie with not as much support. And then the next one above that, maybe a little bit more support. And then I go into the spreader dam deal where I'm going to get, more of a maybe 35 degree, then 45, and then 55, 65 and whatnot, until you might, at the end, it may almost be standing straight up. Right. So, and then obviously, as water flow flows over it and compression and you stripping it through the water, it's going to have a huge profile, but it's going to have that bait fish profile that you're looking for, right? So you don't want to have a huge profile in the back and get skinnier in the middle and skinnier up front. That doesn't look like a fish at all, right? So you just kind of have to imagine what the profile of the bait that you're trying to mimic looks like, and that's a big part of it as well.
Got it. And so I know there are probably not a lot of tools. I have a couple I could probably think of, but are there any kind of special tools that make tying the T-bone a whole lot easier, or like any special resins or anything like that?
Yeah, one, a lighter is huge. So you've got to have a lighter to be able to not let that material fray. So I singe the ends to make that work, right? So you also have those push tools that are readily available to push bucktail. If you want to reverse tie them, those things are great. There's many different versions of those out there. And if you don't have that, you can just take a big pin and take the butt cap off and use that to push bucktail back over itself to get it to push back evenly. And then you can tie in front of it or whatnot. And as far as resins go, there's so many different resins that I like. And, I use Loon products, and I've used all of them. But, one of the main ingredients that I think is super important are the flexible resins, because you can fix a lot of problems. Like if something's not setting right and it's kind of kinked off to the side and it's not following the flow of the other bucktail, you can do a cheat and pull it back to get the shape you want, and then put some resin around the front of the bucktail or synthetic, and then hit it with the light with you slightly holding it in place. And then it looks like you're a professional tire. So there's a lot of cheats out there for people if they're not getting, even the beast fly, if you're not getting it to act exactly the way you want, and everything's in like left, right, top and bottom. Left, top and bottom is good, but the right side's kinked out way out to the side, and it's not holding right. You can just put a little bit of resin right over there and hold it in position and hit it with the light, and you'll set it and angle it to the angle that you want it to be.
Yeah, it's like Brill cream, right? A little dabble, do you?
Little dabble, do you? Yep.
So, in terms of fishing the fly, like where do you generally like to fish the T-bone and the water column, and kind of what are your preferred line and leader setups to get the action that you want?
Yeah, so that's all going to be determined on water flow, seasonal changes, and how the fish are, right? So I would say in general, I'm going to want it. So fishing 10 foot of water, I'm going to want at least anywhere from around that 5 foot to 6 foot range. If you got heavy flows, that's going to be dictated heavily on the lines that you choose, right? So I could use, and I like SA lines, scientific angler stuff. And there's times where I'm using intermediates when we have no flow and water's low, clear. I'll use intermediates with a little bit longer leader, using fluorocarbon because it has a little bit faster sink rate and whatnot. And, the cores of lines make a huge difference on how flies will sink. And we can get into a long discussion on that. But in general, I'm going to have 3 lines with me. I'm going to have a faster intermediate, or 4 lines. I'm going to have more of a slower intermediate. I'm going to have a sinking line that's got just a sink tip with more of a hovering running line behind it. And then I'm going to have a heavy sinking line with a more aggressive intermediate running line behind it, where I've got more contact throughout it. And that's when I'm trying to get deeper, water's deeper, fish are deeper, current's faster, that kind of situation. So I look at it in those aspects, and it's never going to work out where you have one line that's going to do everything for you. I mean, that to me, flies are the most important part of fishing, and the lines that we use are the second most important. So the fly lines are everything, and it's like using the right tool for the job or the wrong tool for the job. Right tool, job's much easier. Wrong tool, job's 10 times longer and more hard, a lot harder.
Yeah. And in terms of kind of leader construction, what do you like to do there?
Yeah, so I mean, it all depends on what I'm doing. But say if we're talking musky stuff, I mean, I keep that part simple. Like coming off the leader, I might go 40 to 30, and then the wire, and not using on sinking line, not using much more than like 5 to 6 foot of leader material, and then you have your bite, right, which is usually 18, 20 inches. Like a 20-inch bite's pretty standard for me to start. But if I'm using intermediate to floating lines, you got to have more of a taper to kind of get that turnover. And then I'm going to taper down and kind of on that lefty cray rule where I do 50, 25, 25, where 50% would be a heavy butt to turn it over. And then 25% taper. And then the other 25% would be your tippet or bite wire. So say a scenario I might use with whatever line it might be, it could be 50 to 60 pound tapering down from there with the other 25%. So took a 10-foot leader, you'd have 5 foot of 50 pounds. And then you might have 12 inches of 40 and then 12 inches of 30. And then you go to your bite, something like that. That's kind of a simple way that I go about it. And it seems to work for me. And, think it'd work for most everybody.
Got it. And so it sounds like you really like to fish the T-bone kind of like midway to like the bottom middle of the water column.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be more mid to upper, because glide baits a lot of times work really well from mid to upper side. But if I have to go super deep, I will. And I'm not against putting a weight in front of one, but then it's changing the action. So it all depends on what I'm really trying to get. If I'm just trying to get down in the zone, fishing for stripers in a rip that they may be down 20 feet, but they're eating a big bunker. They're 12 plus inches long. And for me at that point, I might take something from the conventional world, sinking line, set up way above them, drift with the current and whatnot, and throw upstream, let it sink fast, maybe even use an egg weight on the loop. Like what I'll do is a lot of times I'll take an egg sinker. I'll do a loop knot, and on the bottom end of the loop knot, before I run it back through the loop to tie it off, I'll put an egg sinker on there and cinch it and tie it down. That way you're getting more of that clouser jigging action with it too. But it's also diving it down into that zone to get that fish's attention and make it easier for them to see what you're throwing at them. So there's all kinds of ways of always having the right stuff on the boat, adapting to the water, fish, whatever it may be. I mean, it's always like you got to be prepared for different scenarios, especially as seasonal changes happen in weather and waters and water temperatures and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the fly, we have the leader, we have the line. Any tricks you can kind of share with folks about how you animate the line and the rod to get the action and the T-bone that you like?
Sure. So if I'm looking for more of a glide style, and more of a slide, I would be drifting with the current, kind of throwing it slightly ahead to adjacent, and doing a long downward strip with the rod. I'd have the rod a little bit parallel to the water, and as I strip, slap the rod tip towards the water surface with a strip away and the rod. So if I have my hands together in front of me, I'd strip down I'd push down with the rod tip and strip away with both hands. So if I'm together with my hands, I'd strip away about 2 feet. So what that does is that generates movement towards you. But what happens too is it'll create slack at the end of that strip, because that push down with the rod and that generation of movement forward, that brings that fly, but you also get a little bit of slack as it comes at you, right? So that allows that fly to slide. If I'm trying to get more of a swim bait action, I may put the rod under my arm and do a 2-hand strip with a pause, which if you do a quick couple strips hand over hand, it's going to create a lot of motion forward. And if you stop abruptly, it's going to kick off to the side or up or down. And you get you get a swim bait action with a jerk bait action with that. So, and then you could do the straight, 2 strips pause, 1 long strip pause. And I do that strip a lot where you're getting like that herky jerky left right motion with a pause. And then you make that long strip after that. So you get a runaway and then pause motion. And those are kind of the 3 that I like to use quite often. And generally, one of those 3 will work throughout the day. But sometimes you might have to adjust in between, depends on what's going on.
Yeah, they're such accommodating fish, right?
Yeah, that not just them. I mean, a lot of different fish species. But yeah, I mean, learning on that platform taught me, sometimes when you're big brown trout hunting, I mean, you got to use these same tactics. They both work, right? So when you're targeting apex predators that don't have to eat because they're so good at what they do, they've survived and they've gotten to be that apex predator, you've got to create these triggers, not only with the fly that you're throwing and understanding how that fish is designed to eat, but you're also trying to make a fish that doesn't need to eat, want to eat. And you got to always think about that while you're fishing, right? So, I'm always putting myself in that fly, right? So fish is behind it. How do I need to make this fly swim the way this fish is going to want it to be able to eat it, right? So sometimes it's being a gnat and just keep putting it in those spots where they are until they eat. And sometimes it's doing that fight or flight scenario where you're triggering that eat by speed and running away from them. And sometimes it's pause and pop and stop, where it's, you get their attention, it's in their zone, field of awareness longer, and you're giving them more of a reason to say, maybe I should go check that out, right? So you just kind of always got to adapt to what you're seeing, adapt to water temperatures, adapt to ambient light, water flows, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Super helpful. And, I know you've been incredibly busy at the Chocklett Factory. I mean, 1, because I talked to you, and 2, because I watch social media. You want to kind of let folks know kind of the most recent developments and kind of what's in the pipeline?
Sure. So there's a lot of stuff, man. As you know, I work with ASGA, which is American Saltwater Guides Association, and being the fact that we lost Bob Popovic's later last year, I thought it'd be really important, since we lost Lefty a few years ago, that I would try, and Dave Whitlock for that matter, and many others that we've lost here in the recent years, that it'd be really important to me, because all these legends, I was so lucky to fall in the right place at the right time to have these people be mentors and friends of mine, that it was very important to, 1, pay homage to them and honor what they left for us all. And 2, to make sure that we pay attention to the ones we still have. So I got together with the ASGA team and Tony, the director, and said, I want to bring back Lefty's Pie Fest, which it was a big event that we'd put on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And, me and Klauser and Popovics and Lefty and Ed Jaworowski and many others would just come down out of the love of fly fishing and put on a day where we'd tie flies and just hang out with people that would come, and the benefits would go to conservation. So I was like, I want to get all these people together. So I started making phone calls. I got in touch with Flip. I got in touch with Dahlberg, Klauser, Andy Mill, Chico Fernandez, many others. There's Oliver White, Hillary Hutchinson, Carter Andrews, all these older legends that built a platform us to be able to do what we do now. And decided that we're going to have this event in Vero Beach. And what we're going to be doing is we're bringing all these legends that I just brought up and bringing them together to say thank you. And one, we have Lefty Kray's documentary that's coming out through Fly Fisherman and the Outdoor Channel, and I think BT&T and Bass Pro Shop. Just several people put money up to make this documentary happen, with Jay Nichols filming it and editing it and putting it all together. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of it. So we're having a film. We're going to be not the first premiere, but one of the first premieres. And this event's going to be April 25 and 26 in Vero Beach, Florida. We're having Lefty's film on the 25th, which is Friday night at a movie theater there. And the day of the event, which will be a fly fishing festival that's going to be called Lefty Kray's Tie Fest, where we've got all the big brands like Yeti and Costa and Patagonia and many others, decked, and Scientific Angler, and all of them are going to be involved. And we'll have these people, like I said, Dahlberg and Flip and Chico, and like I said, many others are going to be there, just where we could just get them all together and appreciate who we still have. And all the proceeds are going to be going to Jack Crevalle Research. So for those that don't know, ASGA is all about protecting our fish and our coastal fish, and making sure that the fisheries are healthy, and getting science done to make sure we give the policymakers the right stuff so they can make educated decisions that's beneficial to the health of our fish and fisheries. So Jack Crevalle, just like our Albie project that we've been doing for a while, Jack Crevalle have no regulations on them. So I thought it'd be a great idea to have this event April 25 through 26 and 27. White's Tackle down in Florida has a fly fishing tournament the day after our event to kind of just have a good time and whatnot. But it also is during the Jack Crevalle migration, which is an unbelievable thing. So, I just wanted it to be all about my heroes and paying homage to the ones we still have, and wanting to let them know that we appreciate them, and raise money in the same aspect. And all that money will go to the Jack Crevalle research that ASGA's put up with the help of Florida International and Mississippi State. And we're going to get Jacks protected. We're going to do tagging and DNA studies and telemetry stuff, so we know more about them, so we can give this information to all the policymakers, so we can get regulations put on these fish, because they're an amazing fish. I've been on many calls. I'm doing a film on them, where people have always said they're day savers for guides when they're fishing for tarpon or whatever, and things aren't just happening. So they go out and they go chase jacks around, and it makes a day for them, right? So, jacks are one of the most underrated fish species on the planet, but they're also one of the most fun and strongest fish that I've ever experienced. And, I'm just really happy that all this stuff has come together. And like I said, all these brands like Yeti and that's helped out and making this thing happen. This is going to be almost like a once in a lifetime event. And there's going to be limited amount of people. It's almost like semi-private on the way we're going to do it, just because it's on a private property. But it's going to be a big, small event, and it's going to be something super special in the fishing community.
That's really neat. And I'll drop a link to that in the show notes. But I also know, too, that you've just released a ton of new tying materials, right?
Yeah, I did. My whole life hasn't been revolved around muskies and giant stuff. I mean, I started with trout, and that was a big part of my guiding business forever. And smallmouth bass, being in Virginia with all the great warm water rivers that we have around here. I've had a lot of these flies over the years that I put out, but as time goes by and things come around, you see opportunity. And I came out with my damsel fly patterns 20 plus years ago, and they've been featured in magazines with in Fly Tire and whatnot. With Boyd Pfeiffer was one of the first writers that ever came to visit me and wrote about my flies with my disc sliders and stuff, and wrote about my damsels and dragonflies and stuff like that. And that stuff gets lost. We've talked about that with, you know, sometimes people come along, you don't see the history and whatnot that's been around. And, I just, with the opportunity of 3D printing and whatnot, I've always kind of been frustrated with wings and stuff on bugs, and how I am with movement and stuff. So I came out with these 3D printed wings that I'm able to use on these flies to make the profile silhouette perfect. But I'll also, as I want to put movement in them, and I'm punching a hole in the base of the wing where it attaches to the body, and using synthetic materials almost as a shock absorber / articulation, to where these wings will move on the water and also fold back during casting to make casting not a problem. And the wings are hollow, so you see the vane effect, but the wind will travel through it. So it's not going to be more of that. It won't be that spinning effect that you get with solid materials. So there's, I wouldn't come out with it if I didn't think it made it better. And they're almost indestructible. And then, the body parts, like the Helgermite body parts, the Helgermite changers and the crawl changers have been instrumental in my guiding the past 10, 12, 15 years. And, I've been hand cutting stuff to make things work. And, gotten into this, with my fly company, being able to get things done. And now we have these body parts that's just going to make not only my flies tied faster with my factory, but also makes it a lot easier for the tire out there. So with, time's money, right? So people don't have as much time, and my flies are generally very involved and take time. So I want to make that tying process more enjoyable and more efficient while they're on the vise. So super excited about the crawl changer bodies. We got shrimp stuff coming, crab stuff coming. The 3D wings are out now, along with the Helgermite and crawl bodies. And, there's a whole lot of like 30 plus years of stuff I've been sitting on that's finally going to be hitting the market here over the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's really neat. So folks should either go to the Chocklett Factory or go to one of your dealers, right?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll definitely drop a link to the Chocklett Factory, and I'll see if I can pull together all the links for all your dealers. I know it's a small group, but it is growing a little bit every day. And, Blane, before I let you go, you want to let folks know if they want to kind of learn more about the Chocklett Factory and kind of what you're doing at the Vice and on the water, where they should go?
Yeah, so you can reach me at Blane Chocklett Fishing on Instagram or Facebook. I have that website, BlaneChocklett.com. Then the Shopify store that's attached to all that stuff. And like I said, we have many great dealers, including Mad River Outfitters, Schultz Outfitters, Saltwater Edge. We have, the Fish Hawk in Atlanta. We're kind of have dealers strategically placed all through the country, and adding a few here and there. Not wanting to leave anybody out. TCO and Pennsylvania region, and Bears Den up in that New England area, and along with Saltwater Edge and Rhode Island. And then we have some dealers for opening up out west a little bit, and looking to expand it a little bit more here in the future. And, it's just about putting out good quality flies and not, trying to mass produce. I want all the flies to be the quality that I want. And the materials are a big part of that. And the materials are a lot easier to control over than hand tied flies. So, that's kind of part of the whole thing too. So, you could reach out to me or my dealers. And I know I've left a few out, but I'm more than happy to talk to anybody that wants to reach out about any dealers that might be near them that I didn't mention.
Yeah, I know the one closest to me is probably Tailwaters in Bluff City, but also too, you've got some pretty cool apparel, right?
Yep. So yeah, we've gotten into that a little bit. I've got some cool hats that we designed with the Game Changer logos, and t-shirts and sun shirts and hoodies and whatnot. And we've got, a bunch of different products that we're going to be gradually releasing over time too, that working with some of my companies that sponsor me and whatnot. So yeah, stay tuned to all that stuff. We're just in the beginning of this. Chocklett Factory is only a year old, and we're excited about the future. And I can't wait to share with everybody the stuff that I've learned and from friends and whatnot, and stuff I've learned on my own over the years. And yeah, going to be a good time. And I think we got some cool stuff to share with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, and Easter will be here before you know it, so you need to get your game changer socks, right?
There you go. Yeah, got those too, man. Got to go to church or business wearing your game changer socks. Got to change that game.
That's exactly right. It'll definitely change your game. Well, listen, Blane, I super appreciate you making the time to be the first episode on the Butcher Shop, and I super appreciate all of your friendship and support over the years.
You too, buddy. I'm very honored that you had me, and love what you're doing, and keep doing it, because you're just adding to that body of work that we all striving to kind of make this sport better than what it was before we got here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, listen, you take care, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks. You too.
Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed the interview as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Don't forget to check out the links to all of this episode's sponsors in the show notes. Fish hard, folks.